Okay. Let's take a deep breath and say a bracha together to set the space for ourselves. Join me, please. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We're in the week of Parashat Ekev and the second week of Nechemta, of consolation or comfort of those 7 weeks. And as I said last week, I'd like to start today by just looking at a couple of pieces of the Haftarah for this week first, before we dive into some exploration of the Torah this week. So I'll have a source sheet that I'll share in just a second, but just by way of introduction, remember this notion I think we've talked about here, and I've talked about it in other places that I've found very meaningful, of thinking of the 7 weeks as, in the language of the Haftarot, as a kind of conversation between God and the people. So, like the first week, God says, "Comfort, be comforted, nachamu, nachamu." We looked at that last week, and it's as if the second week it begins with the people's response to that message from God, which is this second haftarah of consolation starts with Isaiah saying, "You have forsaken me," like as if the people are traumatized and they're not going to so easily be comforted. Okay, so that's by way of introduction. Now, what I want to look at with you is God's response to that sense of, I'm still traumatized. I'm not sure I can come out of my my sense of despair. Okay, so uh, here's where Isaiah begins. Now, if I move this there, and what if I do that? Okay. I want to look at two short excerpts from Isaiah with you. The first is towards the beginning of the text, and we're going to hear this text on Shabbat morning. Gil Rosen is going to be chanting it. Looking forward to that. God says, through Isaiah's mouth, God says to these people who have remembered that the people begin, the opening foray is, "You have forsaken me, God." God says, "Hen al kapayim chakotich." I haven't forsaken you. You're right here in the palm of my hand. You're engraved. Every time I look at my hand, it's of course a very anthropomorphic image of God, but it's describing how much God is saying, you may feel forsaken, but actually let me show you, let me reassure you, let me try to convince you. I've never let you go. You're always with me. Chomotayich negdi tamid. Your walls are always before me, which of course is an interesting image, and it's impossible for Jewish people who are knowledgeable about Jewish history to see a phrase like "chomotayich negdi tamid" and not think of the walls of the temple, which of course we have only one remaining retaining wall, which we know today as the Kotel. So in an interesting flip around, in Isaiah's mouth, God is saying, this monument has never left. And then God continues saying, "Miharu banaich, maharisaich, umaharivayich." So I'm saying that in the Hebrew so we can hear the beauty of the language, not just the content, but the way the language is an artistic expression itself. Some of these verses I read, and I remember Hannah Weisberger saying to me, "It's like reading Shakespeare. It's just some of the most beautiful language." We have to really appreciate that. God says, "Not only have you been in the palm of my hand, and have I always kept you as a wall in front of me, there's a movement that's about to happen. Your children are coming quickly to you." And now I want to skip down to verse 18. "Si'i saviv einaich," lift up your eyes and look around. You're like this. Your head is in your hands, but I need you to pick up your eyes and look. Kulam nikbetsu baulach. All, all of the assembly is about to happen. In other words, there's going to be a resurgence, a reorganization. It's all coming back to a place of community and vitality. And then look at this last beautiful part here. Ki kulam ka'adi tilbashi utkashrim kakala. The gathering of all these children is going to be almost as if you are a bride dressed in her finery, in her jewels. So image of the bride appearing before us as a beacon of beauty and hope and future, I think is the main point. There's a future here. It's not over. You may feel that it's over, but it's not over. And so now I'm going to skip ahead in the Isaiah into chapter 51. So this part that we're looking at now is towards the beginning of the Haftarah, and much later, almost near the end of it. And so you have to imagine, I'm saying this way, imagine the text that's missing right here that I didn't put in the source sheet is this conversation between God and Israel continuing to say, look at us, we're a waste. We have nothing to say for ourselves, and it's clearly because God, you've turned against us. So as if God is saying, let me see if I can come at it this way. Okay, now in chapter 51, Habitu el Avraham avichem ve'el Sarah, excuse me. So let's look back to Abraham and to Sarah. Ki echad karativ va'avarchehu va'arbehu. This one, meaning Abraham, I called him and I blessed him and I increased him, va'arbehu. In other words, if I could do that with Abraham and Sarah, I can also do this with you, and I am going to do this with you. Look at the verse 3 now. Ki nichem Adonai Tzion nichem kol chorvotea vayasem midbara ka'eden va'arvata kegan Adonai. God has comforted Zion, comforted all the ruins, and made her wilderness Kagan Adonai, like Eden, like a garden of God. I want to just read you a short commentary on this. And this I didn't put it in the source sheet, just this is a short thing. It's from a book that Matt Wald had given me some time ago, Commentaries on the Haftarot. It's by Gideon Weitzman. Okay, so this commentator is just explaining about Isaiah's invoking of Abraham and Sarah in this moment where the children of Israel are feeling so forlorn. Yeshayahu, Isaiah, urges the people to turn and look to our forefathers, Abraham and Sarah. And he quotes here from Isaiah, look to the rock from which you were carved and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. Look to Abraham and your father and to Sarah who gave birth to you. For when he was yet one alone did I summon him and bless him and make him many. As God has comforted Zion, comforted all her ruins, God will make the desert like Eden and her plains like a garden of God. Joy and gladness will be found, thanks and the voice of singing. Okay, now going back to the commentator. We are encouraged to look at Abraham and Sarah as they were the source of the beginning of all that we have and all that we are. They are the rock from which we are hewn. We resemble them and we need to emulate them. They are the hole from which we were dug. Skipping ahead now. We are to look back to the giants who founded our nation and strive to be like them. We have to try and act as they did and as they would. This will grant us personal gain both in this world and in the next world, etc., etc. I couldn't help when I read this. We are to look back to the giants who founded our nation and hear the echo from this ancient text and what it's trying to say to us to the moment that we're in now. as Americans and struggling to figure out how we're supposed to take our next step as a country. And in fact, also we have to look to the giants who founded us to realign with those core principles. Okay, that was just a bit of introduction with the gorgeous Isaiah text. What a feast for us at this time of year. Now to go back to the Torah, and let's keep the image of Abraham and Sarah in the back of our minds, because that's one of the things that's going to come up in this week's parasha. I actually don't have it here on the source sheet, but I want us to sort of keep it in the mix as we encounter this week's teaching. As the whole book of Deuteronomy does, Moses is continuing to recount the journey that the whole community has been on so far. And we are going to pick up today with chapter 11. And before I turn us to that, I want to just set the stage for us. So it's so interesting to watch Moses in Deuteronomy and see how he sort of toggles back and forth between like being very personal, like let me tell you what I've been through, and recounting. And in chapter 10, 9 and 10 of Parashat Ekev, this week's parasha, he goes through a whole recounting of his experience of Sinai. Like, this is what I did, and this is what God said to me, and then I had to fuss with you all. And, it's really a very detailed personal account. And then it's as if he flips a switch and the language changes, the rhetoric changes from, this is what I experienced, to, this is what you all need to know. This is what you all need to remember and you need to observe in order to continue to merit this promise that has been given you of the entry into this land and the blessing that God has promised. Okay, so that's what has gone on just now. Moses has said, listen, this is what happened on Sinai. Let me tell you how it was for me. And now, Israel, listen. Okay, so let's go back to the source sheet. I didn't show you the title yet. This is the title, Always Looking Up. And that will become, I hope, clear as we go through our texts. Okay, I have quite a long chunk of Torah here that I want to look at with you. So let's start here. Okay, so again, chapter 11, we've just been through this recount of Moses' personal experiences, and now he's sort of distilling that or transforming that personal narrative into, this is what you all need to know. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, you have to love God, to keep God's charge, God's laws, God's rules. I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly. Moses is going to remind them of the experience of Egypt. So verse 2, V'yidatem hayom ki lo et b'nechem asher lo yad'u v'asher lo ra'u et musar Adonai Elohechem. It was not your children who experienced or witnessed the lessons of Adonai. That's going to be important for us in just a few minutes. Et gadlo ve'et yado hachazaka uzro'o hanetuya. They didn't experience God's greatness or God's, yad chazaka uzro'o hanetuya. You're right back at the Seder now. This image of God taking the children of Israel out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. That's exactly the language that's being used here. Going on to verse 3. Ve'et ototav ve'et ma'asav, God's miracles and works, asher asa betoch Mitzrayim, that were done in the middle of Egypt in order to extricate you. Okay, now verse 4. Just continuing the recount of what happened in Egypt. I'm going to skip ahead. Let's get past Zatan and Aviram to verse 7. Let's go ahead here. Ki enechem haraot et kol ma'aseh Adonai. You saw with your own eyes what God did. Hagadol asher asa, the great things that God did. Ushmartem et kol mitzvah asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. So ushmartem it's in the future imperative. So therefore you must keep the instruction that I'm transmitting to you today, so that you can merit this gift of the land that you're about to enter. Asher atem ovrim shama l'rishta. Okay, keeping this going. Okay, now verse 10. Ki ha'aretz asher ata ba shama l'rishta, the land that you are about to inherit or to possess, lo ke'eretz Mitzrayim hi. It's not like the land of Egypt, asher yatzatem misham, that you came out from there. Asher tizra et zaracha, v'hishkita beraglecha, kegan hayarak. Hayarak. Look at that in the English with me for a minute. The land you are about to enter and possess is not like the land of Egypt from which you have come. There, in Egypt, the grain you sowed had to be watered by your own labors, like a vegetable garden. So look at the Hebrew for a second. Lo ke'eretz Mitzrayim, not like the land of Egypt is she. Asher yatzatem. Asher tizra et zaracha, where you had to handle the watering, like you had to carry the water yourselves to make sure that the land would produce. Ha'aretz asher atem ovrim shama l'rishta, the land you're about to enter, eretz harim ubekaot, it's a land of mountains and hills, limtar hashamayim tishtei mayim, a land of hills and valleys which soaks up its water from the rains of heaven. And thus the title of this week's session, which is Parashat Ekev, always looking up. In the land of Egypt, you have to look down, because how is the land irrigated? From the Nile, from overages of the Nile, and from you taking your bucket and going and collecting water. It says in the Torah text, by your own foot. You got to carry the water to your garden and water it. In the land of Israel, it's going to come from rain. So your job as a farmer is to follow the mitzvot. That's going to be the most important thing. And you have to have your farming techniques well in hand as well. But the ecology, the ecology of a successful farming endeavor is going to come from your commitment to the covenant. And that requires always looking up. You got to always be looking up at God. Okay, let's go back to the text. I think of Rabbi Manny, who I spoke to yesterday, by the way, who's been very good, doing well. He said, the Egyptians always look down. The children of Israel are always looking up. No offense to modern day Egyptians, of course. Okay, let's go on to verse 12. Eretz asher Adonai Elohecha doresh ota tamid, einei Adonai Elohecha ba mereshit hashana ve'ad acharit shana. This is a land where God's eyes are always on you, a land in which your God looks always attentively. Mereshit hashana, from the beginning of the year, ad acharit hashana, from the end to the end of the year. Okay, so another thing that we're going to be looking at in commentary in just a second. In Egypt, it's not clear where God's attention was, but in the land of Israel, with you who have been chosen for this covenant, God's eyes are on you, so you better get it right. Okay, and now, language that I think will be familiar, very familiar. V'haya im shamoa tishma'u el mitzvotai asher anochi mitzaveh etchem. It's liturgy, that's why it's familiar to us. This is the middle paragraph of the Shema. Or excuse me, I should say, this is what was taken to be the middle paragraph of the Shema. So for people who pray regularly, it becomes Baal Peh. You know it in your mouth because you say it every morning and every evening. So I just thought it was important for us to see this, which is part of the Shema that we say in our Siddur, and where it comes from in the Torah, where it is situated. It's situated right after this important passage in which Moses is saying, remember Egypt, remember how you came out from Egypt, and now the land you're going into is not Egypt. It's a very different kind of place. It's a place where you need to look up and you need to maintain that covenant. You're going to have the eyes of God on you, and the way you'll know that God's attention is with you is how the rainfall unfolds, whether it's the right amount of rain at the right time. And we know how, even today, how essential and really vital the proper flow of water is all over the Middle East. And for us in particular, we're very much in touch with the land of Israel and how it has struggled to manage its water problems and come up with all kinds of new techniques for desalination, etc. So the fact that rain falls in the land of Israel, and that's how sustenance is earned, sustenance is gained, is of central importance to the manifestation of that covenant. That's how we know that God is paying attention. That's how our ancestors understood it. Okay, let's look at this passage here. V'haya im shamoa tishma'u al mitzvotai. Where are we? If you obey these commandments, le'ahava et Adonai Elohechem, to love God, ule'avdo b'chol levavchem u'b'chol nafshechem, and to serve God with all your heart and all your soul. And if you do all of that, v'natati matar artzechem be'ito, I will give moisture on the land in its season. So in other words, it won't be like a terrible tsunami coming at the wrong time. It will be a gracious, steady, seasonal flow of nourishment. Yoreh omakosh v'asafta deganecha v'tiroshcha v'yitzharecha. And what will happen? There will be grass for your herds, and you will have plenty to eat. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead. V'natati esev b'sadecha li v'hemtecha v'achalta v'savata. You will eat and you will be satisfied. But watch out now. Hishamru lachem pen yiftei levavchem v'sartem v'vadatem Elohim achirim. Watch out now. Don't get distracted. Don't get pulled away to other deities, to other gods, and to start to serve them. V'avadetem Elohim achirim, v'hish tachavitem lahem, and don't start bowing down to them. If you do, v'chara af Adonai bachem, God, you can be sure that God's anger is going to flare up on you. And how will you know that anger is flaring up? Atzarat hashamayim v'lo yeh matar al ha'adama. The heavens will close up, and there will not be the needed rainfall, moisture on the land. Lo titen et yevula va'avadetem mehera me'al ha'aretz hatova asher Adonai noten lachem. It's going to go badly for you. Here, it's spelled out right here. God's anger will flare up against you, shutting up the skies so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that Adonai is assigning to you. Okay, just want to finish this part and then start the commentaries that we have compiled for today. So let's go on to verse 18. V'samtem et dvarai ele al levavchem ve'al nafshechem. Bind these words as a sign on your heart and on your soul. Ukshartem otam leot al yedchem v'hayu letotafot beineinechem. Here's the proof text for the commandment of the tefillin, the words that are al yedchem, on your arm and on your, between your eyes. V'limadetem otam et b'nechem ledaber bam. Teach them to your children. Speaking of them, b'shivtecha b'veitecha, when you sit in your house, u'v'lechtecha v'derech, when you go out on your way, u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha, when you lie down and when you rise up. And here you can hear the echo from Ve'ahavta. It's the same language, it's just a different part of the Torah. Uchtavtem al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha. Make sure that you write these words down on that doorpost of your house, so that every time you pass from one space to another, you'll remember these words, especially when you leave your house. Lama'an yirbu yemechem v'yemei v'nechem al ha'adama, so that your children will be able to live a long time on this land that has been promised to your ancestors. And here we have the mention, well, it's implied, but it's pretty clear. Asher nishba Adonai la'avotechem latet lehem. So here's Abraham and Sarah, and also Isaac, Rebecca, Jacob. Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, all of them, I would add in. That covenant was made with them, and you're now about to fulfill it. Okay, that was a lot of text to go through. So let me just pause here and see any questions, any comments, anything at all. So let me throw out a question, which is, when we're in shul together, Michael, I'll come to you in a second. You may be familiar with the fact that the Reconstructionist Siddur that we have offers two different alternatives. So one alternative is this paragraph we just looked at, V'haya im Shemoah. That's the traditional middle paragraph of the Shema. Our Siddur offers a different one, which was originally selected because this one, the traditional one, was seen as theologically difficult from a Reconstructionist perspective. So difficult because it seems to say, if you do this, God will bless you, and it's, like a Santa Claus kind of relationship with God, which our earlier generations of Reconstructionist editors and thinkers really struggled with. So they put something else in as an alternative. But in fact, when this Kol HaNeshama Siddur was published, they added this traditional one back in, recognizing that it had a certain essential message. I think especially once we started to recognize, is going back several decades now, the reality of the climate situation and how, in fact, it seems to be true what the Torah says. So they added it back in to say, no, actually, it would be good for us to remember this as we attempt to live on the land that we've been given, whatever land that is. Okay, Michael, and then Audrey.
Just as an aside, way back at the beginning, the timeline in the Torah comes up as a problem, because Moses says, none of your kids came out of Egypt, but you'll remember when you came out of Egypt. Mm-hmm. No, those guys are all gone. Mm-hmm. He's talking to people that never came out of Egypt.
Yes, it is a problem, I know.
Which should, it's a problem and should give us a different insight as to who the audience is.
Yeah.
And not take it the way it looks.
Right. And I don't know whether, I mean, if I was one of the classical commentators always trying to help the Torah save face, would I finagle that around and say, well, there were some left. There were some left from the original generation, and they actually had seen, and the fact that they were eyewitnesses, to that experience, gives them a special sense of responsibility. Something like that, I think, is how I would answer it. But I had the same question that you did, so appreciate you bringing that up. Audrey, and then Gil.
Yeah, as I study this, in particular the next parsha, everything is very aspirational and so conditional. If then, and honestly, we have never lived up to any of this. As individuals, we try really hard. As a society, we really have not. Certainly in Israel, this has not been lived up to. So I think I'm struggling with this now more than ever, especially in our day right now, that there's so much that we could be doing, we should be doing, and then good stuff would happen, and we're somehow incapable of doing that. So I appreciate the aspirational nature of all this, but my question is, has it really motivated countries, leaders, people to kind of do the right thing? And that's where I'm this year I'm really struggling with this.
I think
Just a statement.
yeah, I think we all join you in that struggle. If I can be so bold as to speak for everyone, I'm certainly speaking for myself. Uh, I think, Audrey, part of what you're saying at least brings up for me this notion that we, in the diaspora, I think we want to hold Israel to a higher standard because somehow we feel like, okay, this is what's at the core, even in a secular state. This is what's supposed to be informing modern policy, and why is it so hard to, and of course what we're looking at now is about the relationship with the planet, basically. But we know very well that the Torah goes to great lengths to lay out civil behavior. We're not looking at that passage right now, but it goes on and on. I think it mentions over 30 different times to treat the stranger with kindness. Okay, so thank you for bringing that up. Gil, go ahead.
Just to answer Michael's question, I believe that everyone over 20, the people of the men and women of military age were the ones who died in the desert. But the ones under 20 were still alive. They would have been much older. So they do remember the Exodus. They were children.
They were children.
Right.
Thank you.
I believe that is the case.
That is a much better answer. Thank you so much, Gil. There would have been survivors old enough to remember, but who weren't wiped out as being adults at the time. Shlomo, go ahead, and then we'll go back to our comments, our commentaries.
Yeah, with regard to Audrey's comment, I think from the very beginning, the writers of the Torah make clear that we have a Yetzer HaTov and a Yetzer HaRa, and that our major task in this world is to control our Yetzer HaRa. And I don't know whether it's Israel or whether it's the whole world or every individual on this planet, but our tendency is to respond to our self-interest. And what's going on in the world now, more than it might have been, or more than it seemed anyhow, 25 to 30 years ago, is that people are publicly demonstrating their self-interest. And whether it's in the world of politics or in the world of international policy or in the individual situation, and it's still our major task in this world to control our self-interest.
Amen. Thank you. Okay. Let's go back now to the text. And I want to just share with you, I actually have a lot of Talmud in our source sheet today, and I want to see if we can go through it together, hopefully not rushing, but somewhat expeditiously. Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to look at with you is about this question of being an eyewitness, as Michael Ackerman brought up. This idea that in the text, in the Torah text, it says, those of you who had the chance to see what happened with your own eyes, you have a different level of responsibility. So I just skipped down to the end of this piece. Here's the Torah text. Know this day, for I speak not with your children that have not known and that have not seen, but your eyes have seen all the great work of God, which God did. So the commentator here is saying this verse means to say that the claim from the Creator on you is stronger and more evident than the claim on your descendants who did not witness the miracles of the Creator. So in other words, you who were part of that generation that has made this journey, and maybe if we take Gil's helpful explanation that they were maybe children but old enough to have seen and are now adults, now older adults maybe, since you witnessed them with your own eyes, and only you were bestowed with those great favors and were spared from the plagues of Egypt and of Korach, they mention here. But your descendants were not present. Therefore, you are more obligated to serve God on account of them. So your commitment to this covenant isn't just for you, it's for the future. I just thought this was so interesting because we know there are other places in the Torah. I'm thinking specifically of Parashat Nitzavim, where it says, in fact, we just had this last week, past, present, and future. We had a passage where it says, all of you are gathered here all of you are included in this covenant, not only the ones who stood at Sinai, but all of the future. So this is an interesting juxtaposition because it seems to go in a somewhat different direction. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, now a little bit of Rashi. This is, he's commenting on this phrase, v'hishkita beraglecha. In other words, that in Egypt, you had to water the land with your foot. It sounds like a funny translation in English. It doesn't mean actually to water it with your foot, but in other words, on foot, you had to carry the water and water the ground. You couldn't look to the heavens. The land of Egypt was such that you had to bring water from the Nile. You had to go to the Nile to bring it, to irrigate it. You had to rise up from your sleep and toil. Then again, the low-lying parts alone drank and were irrigated by the Nile, and not the higher land, and you had to carry the water up to the higher lands since they couldn't receive the overflow from the Nile. But this land, limtar hashamayim tishtei mayim, drinks the water of the rain of heaven. So Rashi is explaining that it's saying as if you may sleep soundly on your beds, and the Holy One, blessed be He, waters both low and high districts, both what is exposed and what is not exposed alike. And he says he's quoting from Sifrei Devarim, from a Midrash on Devarim. In other words, because it's coming from the sky, it doesn't matter whether you live in the heights or in the valleys, the water is going to come. Okay. Now Ibn Ezra, a little bit after Rashi. This land, ki ha'aretz, as opposed to that land. This land, not Egypt. Another reason why you are obligated to observe God's commandments. The land is not like the land of Egypt. Ki ha'aretz einena ke'eretz Mitzrayim. On the contrary, the land needs God to keep God's eye on it. Rak yesh la tzorech el Hashanah lasum Hashem einav, for God's eyes to be on it. The meaning of our verse can be understood with the following parable. God will act like a person who sees all that the land needs and will give everything in its time. God is like a gardener in heaven, constantly watching and seeing what needs pruning, what needs watering, to make sure that the garden stays healthy. Okay, now we're going forward in time. Again, playing with the same idea. Ki ha'aretz asher ata ba shama, the land that you're about to enter, lo ke'eretz Mitzrayim hi. It's not like the land of Egypt. Asher tizra ba et zaracha, where you had to work the land differently. This land is not like the land of Egypt, where all the farmer had to do was plant the seed and nature would take over automatically, as the Nile would irrigate the seedlings. Because remember, the fertility in Egypt comes from the Nile overflowing its banks. Therefore, v'haya im tishme'u, it will be a result of your hearkening, your paying attention, that I will direct my rain to the land that needs it. Okay, let's keep going. Just a few of these smaller ones. Sifrei Devarim. Lo ke'eretz Mitzrayim hi. Again, playing with that same idea that this is not like the land of Egypt. Eretz Mitzrayim shoteh min hanamuch. The land of Egypt drinks from the low places. Eretz Yisrael shoteh min hagvoah. Did I say that correctly? Hagvoah. Yeah, hagvoah. The Eretz Yisrael, the low and the high. Namuch v'gavoah, drinks from the low and the high. The land of Egypt drinks its own waters from the Nile. Eretz Yisrael drinks from the heavens. Okay. Now this is where there's going to be some Talmud. You can see that in several of these, Rashi is going to quote from the Talmud, and I thought it would be interesting for us to actually look at the Talmudic passages. So first, here's Rashi. And this image of God is watching you. The eyes of God are on that land at all times. Tamid einei Adonai Elohecha ba. Lir'ot ma hitzricha, to see what's needed. Ulechadesh ba gezerot itim letova, itim lera'ah. To see what it requires, and always to make new Interesting. It says here in the translation, dispensations, gezerah, gezerot. Gezerah is a decree, like deciding what's needed here. I'm going to say, God is going to say, some seasons for goodness, itim litova, itim lira'ah, sometimes, no, not so good. Kidi'ita in Rosh Hashanah, he's going to say, as we explained in Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so hold on to this image of, God is watching us, God is watching us from a distance, etc. Okay, I have to ask your patience because I found a piece of 17b that I just thought was so beautiful. I had to put it in here. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I hope you'll find it as nourishing as I did putting this together. All right, so this is from 17b. We have two examples. This is the first one. So this is the sages grappling with this thing of, is God always going to be good to us and always watching us? And here, they're pulling up this quote from Exodus. You remember this famous moment in Exodus when Moses says, God, show me your face. And God says, I can't show you my face, but I can pass by behind you. So go put your face in that rock and I'll pass by behind you. So that's what's going on here. That's what's being quoted here. Vaya'avor Adonai al panav vayikra. The verse teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, wrapped himself in a prayer shawl like a prayer leader. Milamed shenitztatef hakadosh baruch hu k'shaliach tzibor. So now God is not the gardener in heaven, but in fact a shaliach tzibor, a chazan. V'har'elo leMoshe seder tefillah, and shows Moses the order of the prayers, as if to say, Moses, you have to say the Shema before you say the Amidah. You can't do those out of order. They go in a certain order. God said to Moses, whenever the Jewish people sin, let them act before me in accordance with this order. In other words, let them do this order of prayer. Let the prayer leader, and again, in this, I'm just explaining here, in this version, the bolded parts are the actual Talmudic text, and the unbolded is just the editor helping us to fill in what we wouldn't understand otherwise. Let the prayer leader wrap himself in a prayer shawl and publicly recite the 13 attributes of mercy. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim, etc. And I will forgive them, God says. So God is laying out, this is what to do when things go bad. Tell the chazan to put on the prayer shawl and say the 13 attributes. And, of course, with the community present. And and Rav Yehuda, one of the sages, goes on to say, when they fulfill this practice of reciting the 13 attributes, they will not return empty-handed. So in other words, if you're there on the land and the heavens in fact do close up and you're terribly worried about what's happening, this is one of the ways you can put things right again. You can put on your prayer shawl and pray, and here's in fact what to say in your prayers, and open that channel of connection with heaven again, hopefully. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled source sheet. Thank you for allowing me to do that little detour. I just thought it was too wonderful. Okay, now this is what Rashi is speaking about in his comment above. They're playing with this phrase, Einei Adonai Elohecha ba. The eyes of God are always going to be on you. Itim letova. Itim letova.
I'm thinking that the ba is the land, is not the
On
people.
it. Yes, thank you. It's on the land. You're right, Shlomo. I'm playing a little bit loose with it. I think that God wouldn't care about the land except for the people that live on it, I guess, is the way I would put it. So maybe I'm wrong,
but he takes them off the land when they do the wrong stuff.
Yes. Point well taken, as usual. Thank you. Okay, so with Shlomo's fair update, correction here. Einei Adonai Elohecha ba. The eyes of God are on the land. I would say on the people and on the land. Itim letova, itim lera'ah. in times of goodness and in times of bad. So the God is watching no matter what's going on. Itim l'tova ketzad. Harei shehayu Yisrael risha'im gemurin berosh Hashanah. Let's see. If the Jews were wholly wicked on Rosh Hashanah, so that only a meager amount of rain was decreed for them for the year, but in the end they repented, what can be done? You can't add rain, since the decree was already issued. Rather, the Holy One, blessed be He, causes those sparse rains to fall at the appropriate time on land that needs it, on fields and vineyards. This supports what Shlomo is saying, not on the people, but on the land, all according to the requirements of the land, and those rains are just as effective as a lot of rain. So sometimes all you need is just a little bit of the right rain at the right time, and it can save the crop. And sometimes for the bad, how so? If the Jewish people were wholly righteous on Rosh Hashanah, so that much rain was decreed for them for that year, but in the end they regressed and sinned, what can be done? To reduce the amount of rain was impossible, likewise, since the decree was already made. Rather, the Holy One, blessed be He, causes the rain to fall, excuse me, not at the appropriate time and on land that does not need it. And we know what that looks like. That creates a different set of problems. Michael, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, it occurred to me that this whole thing, in another world, if you will, is a justification for book learning Judaism as opposed to sacrificial Judaism.
Why so?
Well, the people he's talking to and where it's set is pre-diaspora. So the way you asked for forgiveness is you brought sacrifices. We went through a whole book filled with it. And now all of a sudden we're saying, you don't have to give sacrifices. You can read this, you can say this, you can feel this. So we're experiencing here the transition from the sacrificial system to the book system, and the rabbis are justifying the system that they put in with respect to what past history was.
Kol hakavod. Certainly these Talmudic passages, sorry, just a delivery going on here. These Talmudic passages were compiled at a time when they lived outside the land. They had been exiled, and they were trying to figure out, how do we maintain this connection with heaven as their forebears had understood it, at least. And yes, we can do it with words and not sacrifices. Kol hakavod. Debbie, go ahead.
So
Wait, don't forget to unmute.
well, okay. So that's lovely, but I gotta say, as someone with a lot of immersion in agriculture, and as someone who is trying to be a good reconstructionist, how do I reconcile myself with this whole idea that prayer is interventional? That is going to contravene natural law. So just throwing it out there.
No, it's essential. I mean, it's so funny. I forget sometimes, like, you have to say these things out loud. So first of all, we're looking at these commentaries and understanding them in the historical context they were written in, and the theological context they were written in, which is different from, I think, for all of us, than the theology we're searching for in our time. And I guess I'd be curious to hear what others would have to say in response to Debbie's excellent question. I would start by saying, no, I mean, I don't think that if I say the right prayers at the right time, somehow the forest fires will stop, or the floods will stop, or the crazy, dangerous things we've been experiencing, just to give that as an example. But what I would hope, and this is really to go back to what Audrey was saying before, is if I keep putting these words in my mouth over and over again, it will remind me about what I'm supposed to be doing here on the planet in the realm of my species. Not because I think God is going to respond, but because it helps me remember to put myself back in my proper place. Drawing on what Shlomo was saying, like, it takes 2 seconds for my Yetzer Hara to go, oh, here I am, ready to take over, and so prayer is one of the things that helps it's like a good therapy session. You know, it helps you put you back where you belong and see yourself in proper relationship to your loved ones, to the world around you, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I
So,
think that's a very fair assessment. I mean, good intentions and prayer as a tool for driving or focusing our intentions makes perfect sense to me.
yeah,
And it's something I can adopt and something I can respect and embrace. But, I just think it's so important for us as we look at these texts, just kind of figure out what our approach wants it should be
yes,
or can
yes,
be. Like Audrey says, that's a plug for 10 morning minion on Monday and Thursday.
right.
Oh, if I
Well,
could
but
get
Debbie,
up early.
also, could you not say, I mean, I don't know, I'm asking you, could you, you know, make the connection between this Talmudic theology, which says all that has to happen is put on your prayer shawl and say the 13 attributes and the imbalances will be balanced out. We don't, I mean, we don't accept that at face value anymore. But might we say, you know what, put on your prayer shawl and then go to your job on Capitol Hill and see what decisions you choose to make, or whatever. I'm just giving one, obviously.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so it's not a direct cause and effect relationship, except as I'm saying to you, the Reconstructionist editors, when they printed what's now an older prayer book, but 25 years ago was brand new, 30 years ago, they said, oh, you know what, we better put this traditional passage back in, exactly addressing what you're struggling with. Okay, Barb and Shlomo, and then I still would like to come back to one last thing.
So I think, Debbie, I appreciate your question. I wrestle with that too. If I do this, nothing bad will happen to my children, etc. But But I do think that we have to remember the context. They're what, and maybe this is part of the theology of the Hebrews at that time. They didn't understand why the rains came, why the floods came. There was no rational reason for it. So they were trying to overlay on the natural system some kind of belief system that they had. And, I mean, that's why Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court was such a wonderful book, because this person knew about an eclipse, but the people in that time, doing that time travel, didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Barb. Shlomo, go ahead.
This might be slightly off, so you may not want to get into it, but we frequently refrain Adonai Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, and then we leave off the second half of it, where it says V'lo Yinakeh, but I'm not going to forgive the sins of the fathers, and I will impose them on the third and fourth generations.
Right.
Somehow we forget about that part. The thing that I find most interesting is in the next parasha, after Korach's rebellion, which was an incredible sin, in Pinchas it says, V'lo metu b'nei Korach. And the sons of Korach, the guy who did this whole thing, didn't die when they were all swallowed up by the earth. So it's a direct contradiction. I'm going to impose the sins of the fathers on the sons. And then the Torah says, but the sons of Korach didn't die.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of interested in the second half of that Adonai Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun, which we never really mentioned very much.
No, I mean it wasn't new. It wasn't canonized as part of the liturgy. It's in the Torah, but it's not. We don't say it as prayer. I guess because how can you aspire to that? If your basic thing about prayer is that it's aspirational, how can you aspire and hope that the sins of this generation will be visited on the future generations? Except in the world of ecology and the environment, I mean, that's pretty much what's happening. So very, very enormously upsetting for anybody who is hoping that there's a future. So, whew. I'm afraid to even go there right now. I want to end, actually. We have, let's see, we have, I think, just enough time to do this. So let's see. You know what? I'm going to skip past. This goes into all this beautiful language about Rosh Hashanah. Okay, quickly. Remember in the Torah text, we had that passage that said God is watching and deciding from the beginning of the year until its end. May Rosh Hashanah nidun ma yeh b'sofa. At the beginning of the year, it is decided. This is Rashi commenting what will be, what will happen all the way through the end of the year. And I just pulled out the citation that Rashi is using as his own proof text from back in the Talmud. Now, I'm going to go to the end here. When the Mishnah says that the first of Tishrei was the new year for years, it is with regard to judgment, as on that day God judges the world for the whole year. Kamosha Katuv, as it is written, a land that the Lord your God cares for. The eyes of God are always upon it. There you go, Shlomo. From the beginning of the year until the end of the year. So quoting from our passage that we looked at, from the beginning of the year, judgment is passed as to what will happen at the end of the year. The Gemara then raises a question. From where is it known that the day of judgment is in Tishrei? And then the Gemara tells itself. We know it from Psalms. Blow a shofar, tiku b'chodesh shofar, b'kesel yom chagenu. That we say in the service on Rosh Hashanah from Psalms 81. Okay, I want to end with you today by looking at Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi's translation of this V'haya im Shamoa, this middle passage of the Shema. Okay, where are you all? Here we are. So let me just screen share. No, that's not what I meant to do. Screen share. Here. And I'm going to skip here. This is V'haya im Shemo. So this is our Torah text here. And maybe could I have one Hebrew reader and one English reader? A Hebrew reader? Shlomo, will you? And then Barb, will you be our English reader? Okay, so maybe let's go Hebrew first, all of it, and then Barb, will have you come back and do the English, okay?
והיה אם שמוע תשמעו אל מצוותי אשר אנוכי מצווה אתכם היום, לאהבה את אדוני אלוהיכם ולעבדו בכל לבבכם ובכל נפשכם. ונתתי מטר ארצכם בעתו, יורה ומלקוש, ואספת דגנך ותירושך ויצריך. ונתתי עשב בשרך לבהמתך ואכלת ושבעת. ישמרו לכם פן יפתה לבבכם וסרתם ועבדתם אלוהים אחרים והשתחוויתם להם. וחרה אף אדוני בכם ועצר את השמיים ולא יהיה מטר. והאדמה לא תיתן את יבולה. ועבדתם מהרה מעל הארץ הטובה אשר אדוני נותן לכם. ושמתם את דברי אלה על לבבכם ועל נפשכם, וקשרתם אותם לאות על ידכם, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניכם. ולימדתם אותם את בניכם לדבר בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשכבך ובקומך. וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. למען ירבו ימיכם וימי בניכם על האדמה אשר נשבע אדוני לאבותיכם, לתת להם ימי השמיים על הארץ.
Yishar koach. Okay, Barb.
How good it will be when you really listen and hear my directions, which I give to you today for loving Yah, who is your God, and to act godly with feeling and inspiration. Your earthly needs will be met at the right time, appropriate to the season. You will reap what you planted for your delight in health. Also, your animals will have ample feed. All of you will eat and be content. Be careful, watch out, don't let your cravings delude you. Don't become alienated. Don't let your cravings become your gods. Don't debase yourself to them, because the God sense within you will become distorted. Heaven will be shut to you, grace will not descend, earth will not yield her produce. Your rushing will destroy you. The earth will not be able to recover her good balance in which God's gifts manifest. May these values of mine reside in your feelings and aspirations, marking what you produce, guiding what you perceive. Teach them to your children so that they are instructed how to make their homes sacred and how they deal with traffic. Even when you are depressed and when you are elated, mark your entrances and exits with them, so you will be more aware. Then you and your children and their children will live out on earth that divine promise given to your ancestors to live heavenly days right here on this earth.
Beautiful. Thank you. So I realize it's already past 1 o'clock. Just want to thank you for the opportunity to look a little more closely at this middle point of our central prayer of the Shema, which we're going to be studying later tonight again. And to hear, just to bring it to a close, we started with Isaiah saying, God saying through Isaiah, I've been holding you in the palm of my hand, the hand. And then in the Torah text, God saying, God's eyes are going to be on this land at all times. And then there it was in the passage that we just heard about binding it as a sign on your hand and between your eyes. So to continue to explore the ways that we live this tradition through our physical selves and not only through our scholarship. Everyone have a good rest of the day and the week, and I will see you hopefully soon. Keep well.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.